This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, Chapter 3. Well, I got a good goin' over in the mornin' from ole Miss Watson on account of my clothes, but the widow she didn't scold, but only cleaned off the grease and clay, and looked so sorry that I thought I would behave a while if I could. Then Miss Watson she took me in the closet and prayed, but nothin' come of it. She told me to pray every day, and whatever I asked for I would get it. But it warn't so. I tried it. Once I got a fish line, but no hooks. It warn't no good to me without hooks. I tried for the hooks 3 or 4 times, but somehow I couldn't make it work. By, one day, I asked Miss Watson to try for me, but she said I was a fool. She never told me why, and I couldn't make it out no way. I set down one time back in the woods and had a long think about it. I says to myself, if a body can get anything they pray for, why don't Deacon Wynn get back the money he lost on pork? Why can't the widow get back her silver snuff box that was stole? Why can't Miss Watson fat up? No, says I to myself, they ain't nothin' in it. I went and told the widow about it, and she said the thing a body could get by prayin' for it was spiritual gifts. This was too many for me, but she told me what she meant. I must help other people, and do everything I could for other people, and look out for them all the time, and never think about myself. This was including Miss Watson as I took it. I went out in the woods and turned it over in my mind a long time, but I couldn't see no advantage about it, except for the other people. So at last I reckoned I wouldn't worry about it any more, but just let it go. Sometimes the widow would take me one side and talk about Providence in a way to make a body's mouth water. But maybe next day Miss Watson would take hold and knock it all down again. I judged I could see that there was 2 providences, and a poor chap would stand considerable show with the widow's providence, but if Miss Watson's got him, there warn't no help for him any more. I thought it all out, and reckoned I would belong to the widow's if he wanted me, though I couldn't make out how he was a-goin' to be any better off than what he was before, seeing I was so ignorant and so kind o' low down and ornery. Pap he hadn't been seen for more than a year, and that was comfortable for me. I didn't want to see him no more. He used to always whale me when he was sober and could get his hands on me, though I used to take to the woods most of the time when he was around. Well, about this time he was found in the river drownded, about 12 mile above town, so people said. They judged it was him anyway. Said this drownded man was just his size and was ragged and had uncommon long hair, which was all like Pap, but they couldn't make nothin' out of the face because it had been in the water so long it weren't much like a face at all. They said he was floatin' on his back in the water. They took him and buried him on the bank. But I warn't comfortable long, 'cause I happened to think o' somethin'. I knowed mighty well that a drownded man don't float on his back, but on his face. So I knowed then that this warn't Pap, but a woman dressed up in a man's clothes. So I was uncomfortable again. I judged the old man would turn up again by and by, though I wished he wouldn't. We played robber now and then about a month, and then I resigned. All the boys did. We hadn't robbed nobody, hadn't killed any people, but only just pretended. We used to hop out of the woods and go chargin' down on hog drivers and women in carts, taking garden stuff to market, but we never hived any of 'em. Tom Sawyer called the hogs ingots, and he called the turnips and stuff jewelry, and we would go to the cave and powwow over what we had done and how many people we had killed and marked. But I couldn't see no profit in it. One time Tom sent a boy to run about town with a blazing stick, which he called a slogan, which was the sign for the gang to get together, and then he said he had got secret news by his spies that next day a whole parcel of Spanish merchants and rich Arabs was going to camp in Cave Hollow with 200 elephants and 600 camels, and over 1,000 sumpter mules, all loaded down with diamonds, and they didn't have only a guard of 400 soldiers, and so he would lay an ambuscade, as he called it, and kill the lot and scoop the things. He said we must slick up our swords and guns and get ready. We never could go after even a turnip cart, but he must have the swords and guns all scoured up for it, though they were only lath and broomsticks, and you might scour at them till you rotted, and then they warn't worth a mouthful of ashes more than what they was before. I didn't believe we could lick such a crowd of Spaniards and Arabs, but I wanted to see the camels and elephants, so I was on hand next day, Saturday, in the ambuscade, and when we got the word we rushed out of the woods and down the hill. But there weren't no Spaniards and Arabs, and there weren't no camels nor no elephants. It weren't anything but a Sunday school picnic, and only a primer class at that. We busted it up, and chased the children up the holler, but we never got anything but some doughnuts and jam, though Ben Rogers got a rag doll, and Joe Harper got a hymn book and a tract, and then the teacher charged in, and he made us drop everything and cut. I didn't see no diamonds, and I told Tom Sawyer so. He said there was loads of 'em there anyway, and he said there was Arabs there too, and elephants and things. I said, why couldn't we see them then? He said if I warn't so ignorant, but had read a book called Don Quixote, I would know without asking. He said it was all done by enchantment. He said there was hundreds of soldiers there, and elephants and treasure, and so on. But we had enemies which he called magicians, and they had turned the whole thing into an infant Sunday school just out of spite. I said, all right. Then the thing for us to do was to go for the magicians. Tom Sawyer said I was a numbskull. Why, said he, a magician would call up a lot of genies, and they would hash you up like nothing before you could say Jack Robinson. They are as tall as a tree and as big around as a church. Well, I says, suppose we got some genies to help us. Can't we lick the other crowd then? How you going to get them? I don't know. How do they get them? Why, they rub an old tin lamp or an iron ring, and then the genies come tearing in, with the thunder and lightning a-ripping around and the smoke a-rolling, and everything they're told to do they up and do it. They don't think nothing of pulling a shot tower up by the roots and belting a Sunday school superintendent over the head with it, or any other man. Who makes them tear around so? Why, whoever rubs the lamp or the ring. They belong to whoever rubs the lamp or the ring, and they got to do whatever he says. If he tells them to build a palace 40 miles long out of diamonds and fill it full of chewing gum or whatever you want, and fetch an emperor's daughter from China for you to marry, they got to do it, and they got to do it before sun up next morning too. And more, they've got to waltz that palace around over the country wherever you want it, you understand. Well, says I think they're a pack of flatheads for not keeping the palace themselves instead of fooling them away like that. And what's more, if I was one of them, I would see a man in Jericho before I would drop my business and come to him for the rubbing of an old tin lamp. How you talk, Huck Finn! Why, you'd have to come when he rubbed it, whether you wanted to or not. What? And I as high as a tree and as big as a church? All right, then, I would come, but I'd lay I'd make that man climb the highest tree there was in the country. "Shucks, it ain't no use to talk to you, Huck Finn. You don't seem to know anything, somehow. Perfect saphead." I thought all this over for 2 or 3 days. Then I reckoned I would see if there was anything in it. I got an old tin lamp and an iron ring, and went out in the woods and rubbed till I sweat like an Injun, calculating to build a palace and sell it. But it warn't no use. None of the genies come. So then I judged that all that stuff was only just one of Tom Sawyer's lies. I reckoned he believed in the Arabs and the elephants, but as for me, I think different. It had all the marks of a Sunday school. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 4. Well, 3 or 4 months run along, and it was well into the winter now. I had been to school most all the time, and could spell and read and write just a little, and could say the multiplication table up to 6 times 7 is 35, and I don't reckon I could ever get any further than that if I was to live forever. I don't take no stock in mathematics anyway. At first I hated the school, but by and by I got so I could stand it. Whenever I got uncommon tired, I played hooky, and the hiding I got next day done me good and cheered me up. So the longer I went to school, the easier it got to be. I was getting sort of used to the widow's ways, too, and they warn't so raspy on me. Living in a house and sleeping in a bed pulled on me pretty tight mostly, but before the cold weather I used to slide out and sleep in the woods sometimes, so that was a rest to me. I liked the old ways best, but I was getting so I liked the new ones too, a little bit. The widow said I was coming along slow but sure, and doing very satisfactory. She said she warn't ashamed of me. One morning I happened to turn over the salt cellar at breakfast. I reached for some of it as quick as I could to throw over my left shoulder and keep off the bad luck, but Miss Watson was in ahead of me and crossed me off. She says, "Take your hands away, Huckleberry. What a mess you are always making." The widow put in a good word for me, but that warn't going to keep off the bad luck. I knowed that well enough. I started out after breakfast, feeling worried and shaky, and wondering where it was going to fall on me, and what it was going to be. There's ways to keep off some kinds of bad luck, but this wasn't one of them kind, so I never tried to do anything, but just poked along, low-spirited and on the watch out. I went down to the front garden and clumb over the stile where you go through the high board fence. There was an inch of new snow on the ground, and I seen somebody's tracks. They had come up from the quarry and stood around the stile a while, and then went on around the garden fence. It was funny they hadn't come in after standing around so. I couldn't make it out. It was very curious, somehow. I was going to follow around, but I stooped down to look at the tracks first. I didn't notice anything at first, but next I did. There was a cross in the left boot heel made with big nails to keep off the devil. I was up in a second and shinning down the hill. I looked over my shoulder every now and then, but I didn't see nobody. I was at Judge Thatcher's as quick as I could get there. He said, "Why, my boy, you are all out of breath. Did you come for your interest?" "No, sir," I says. "Is there some for me?" "Oh, yes, a half-yearly is in last night. Over $150. Quite a fortune for you. You had better let me invest it along with your 6,000, because if you take it, you'll spend it." "No, sir," I says. "I don't want to spend it. I don't want it at all. nor the 6,000 nuther. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the 6,000 and all." He looked surprised. He couldn't seem to make it out. He says, "Why, what can you mean, my boy?" I says, "Don't you ask no questions about it, please. You'll take it, won't you?" He says, "Well, I'm puzzled. Is something the matter?" "Please take it," says I, "and don't ask me nothin'. Then I won't have to tell no lies." He studied a while, and then he says, "Oho, I think I see. You want to sell all your property to me, not give it. That's the correct idea." Then he wrote something on a paper and read it over and says, "There, you see it says 'for consideration.' That means I have bought it of you and paid you for it. Here's $1 for you. Now you sign it." So I signed it and left. Miss Watson's nigger, Jim, had a hair ball as big as your fist, which had been took out of the fourth stomach of an ox, and he used to do magic with it. He said there was a spirit inside of it, and it knowed everything. So I went to him that night and told him Pap was here again, for I found his tracks in the snow. What I wanted to know was, what he was going to do, and was he going to stay. Jim got out his hair ball and said something over it, and then he held it up and dropped it on the floor. It fell pretty solid, and only rolled about an inch. Jim tried it again, and then another time, and it acted just the same. Jim got down on his knees and put his ear against it and listened. But it warn't no use. He said it wouldn't talk. He said sometimes it wouldn't talk without money. I told him I had an old slick counterfeit quarter that warn't no good because the brass showed through the silver a little, and it wouldn't pass nohow, even if the brass didn't show, because it was so slick it felt greasy, and so that would tell on it every time. I reckoned I wouldn't say nothin' about the $1 I got from the judge. I said it was pretty bad money, but maybe the hairball would take it, because maybe it wouldn't know the difference. Jim smelt it and bit it and rubbed it, and said he would manage so the hairball would think it was good. He said he would split open a raw Irish potato and stick the quarter in between and keep it there all night, and next morning you couldn't see no brass, and it wouldn't feel greasy no more, and so anybody in town would take it in a minute, let alone a hairball. Well, I knowed a potato would do that before, but I had forgot it. Jim put the quarter under the hairball and got down and listened again. This time he said the hairball was all right. He said it would tell my whole fortune if I wanted it to. I says, go on. So the hairball talked to Jim, and Jim told it to me. He says, "Your old father don't know yit what he's goin' to do. Sometimes he speck he'll go away, and den agin he speck he'll stay. De best way is to rest easy and let de old man take his own way. Dere's 2 angels hoverin' round 'bout him. One of 'em is white and shiny, and de other one is black. De white one gits him to go right a little while, den de black one sail in and bust it all up. A body can't tell yit which one gwine to fetch him at de las', but you is all right. You gwine to have considerable trouble in yo' life, and considerable joy. Sometimes you gwine to get hurt, and sometimes you gwine to get sick, but every time you gwine to get well again. Dere's 2 gals flyin' 'bout you in yo' life. One of 'em's light, and de other one is dark. One is rich, and de other is poor. You gwine to marry de poor one fus and de rich one bimeby. You wants to keep away fum de water as much as you kin, and don't run no risk, 'cause it's down in de bills dat you's gwine to get hung." When I lit my candle and went up to my room that night, there sat Pap, his own self. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 5. I had shut the door to. Then I turned around and there he was. I used to be scared of him all the time, he tanned me so much. I reckoned I was scared now, too, but in a minute I see I was mistaken. That is, after the first jolt, as you may say, when my breath sorter hitched, he bein' so unexpected. But right away after I see I warn't scared of him worth botherin' about. He was 'most 50, and he looked it. His hair was long and tangled and greasy, and hung down, and you could see his eyes shinin' through like he was behind vines. It was all black, no gray. So was his long, mixed-up whiskers. There warn't no color in his face where his face showed. It was white, not like another man's white, but a white to make a body sick, a white to make a body's flesh crawl, a tree-toad white, a fish-belly white. As for his clothes, just rags, that was all. He had one ankle restin' on the other knee. The boot on that foot was busted, and 2 of his toes stuck through, and he worked them now and then. His hat was layin' on the floor, an old black slouch with the top caved in like a lid. I stood a-lookin' at him. He set there a-lookin' at me, with his chair tilted back a little. I set the candle down. I noticed the window was up, so he had clumb in by the shed. He kept a-lookin' me all over. By and by he says, "Starchy clothes, very. You think you're a good deal of a big bug, don't you?" "Maybe I am, maybe I ain't," I says. "Don't you give me none o' your lip," says he. "You put on considerable many frills since I been away. I'd take you down a peg 'fore I get done with you. You're educated, too, they say. Kin read and write. You think you're better'n your father now, don't you, because he can't? I'll take it out of you. Who told you you might meddle with such highfalutin foolishness, hey? Who told you you could?" "The widder. She told me." "The widder, hey? And who told the widder she could put in her shovel 'bout a thing that ain't none of her business?" "Nobody never told her." "Well, I'll learn her how to meddle. And looky here, you drop that school, you hear? I'll learn people to bring up a boy to put on airs over his own father, and let on to be better'n what he is. You lemme catch you foolin' round dat school agin, you hear? Your mother couldn't read, she couldn't write nuther, 'fore she died. None of the family couldn't before they died. I can't, and here you're a-swellin' yourself up like this. I ain't the man to stand it. You hear? Say, lemme hear you read." I took up a book and begun something about General Washington and the wars. When I'd read about half a minute, he fetched the book a whack with his hand and knocked it across the house. He says, "Hit's so. You can do it. I had my doubts when you told me. Now looky here. You stop that puttin' on frills. I won't have it. I'll lay for you, my smarty, and if I catch you about that school I'll tan you good. First you know you'll get religion, too. I never seen such a son." He took up a little blue and yaller picture of some cows and a boy, and says, "What's this?" "It's something they give me for learning my lessons good." He tore it up and says, "I'll give you something better. I'll give you a cowhide." He set there a-mumblin' and a-growlin' a minute, and then he says, "Ain't you a sweet-scented dandy, though? A bed, and bedclothes, and a looking-glass, and a piece of carpet on the floor, and your own father got to sleep with the hogs in the tan yard. I never see such a son. I bet I'll take some o' these frills out o' you before I done with you. Why, they ain't no end to your airs. They say you're rich. Hey, how's that? They lie, that's how. Looky here, mind how you talk to me. I'm a standin' about all I can stand now, so don't gimme no sass. I've been in town 2 days, and I ain't heard nothin' but about you bein' rich. I heard about it away down the river, too. That's why I come. You git me that money tomorrow. I want it." "I hain't got no money." "It's a lie. Judge Thatcher's got it. You git it. I want it." "I hain't got no money, I tell you. You ask Judge Thatcher. He'd tell you the same." "All right. I'll ask him, and I'll make him pungle, too, or I'll know the reason why. Say, how much you got in your pocket? I want it." "I hain't got only $1, and I want that to—" "It don't make no difference what you want it for. You just shell it out." He took it and bit it to see if it was good, and then he said he was going downtown to get some whiskey. Said he hadn't had a drink all day. When he had got out on the shed he put his head in again and cussed me for putting on frills and trying to be better than him. And when I reckoned he was gone, he come back and put his head in again, and told me to mind about that school, because he was going to lay for me and lick me if I didn't drop that. Next day he was drunk, and he went to Judge Thatcher's and bully-ragged him, and tried to make him give up the money, but he couldn't, and then he swore he'd make the law force him. The judge and the widow went to law to get the court to take me away from him and let one of them be my guardian. But it was a new judge that had just come, and he didn't know the old man. So he said courts mustn't interfere and separate families if they could help it. Said he'd druther not take a child away from its father. So Judge Thatcher and the widow had to quit on the business. That pleased the old man till he couldn't rest. He said he'd cowhide me till I was black and blue if I didn't raise some money for him. I borrowed $3 from Judge Thatcher, and Pap took it and got drunk, and went a-blowin' around and cussin' and whoopin' and carryin' on, and he kept it up all over town with a tin pan till most midnight. Then they jailed him, and next day they had him before court, and jailed him again for a week. But he said he was satisfied, said he was boss of his son, and he'd make it warm for him. When he got out, the new judge said he was a-goin' to make a man of him. So he took him to his own house and dressed him up clean and nice, and had him to breakfast and dinner and supper with the family, and was just old pie to him, so to speak. And after supper he talked to him about temperance and such things till the old man cried, and said he'd been a fool, and fooled away his life, but now he was a-goin' to turn over a new leaf and be a man nobody wouldn't be ashamed of, and he hoped the judge would help him and not look down on him. The judge said he could hug him for them words, so he cried, and his wife she cried again. Pap said he'd been a man that had always been misunderstood before, and the judge said he believed it. The old man said that what a man wanted that was down was sympathy, and the judge said it was so they cried again. And when it was bedtime the old man rose up and held out his hand and says, "Look at it, gentlemen and ladies all. Take a hold of it. Shake it. There's a hand that was the hand of a hog, but it hain't so no more. It's the hand of a man that started in on a new life, and'll die before he'll go back. You mark them words. Don't forget I said them. It's a clean hand now. Shake it. Don't be afeard." So they shook it, one after the other, all around, and cried. The judge's wife she kissed it. Then the old man he signed a pledge, made his mark. The judge said it was the holiest time on record, or something like that. Then they tucked the old man into a beautiful room which was the spare room, and in the night sometime he got powerful thirsty and clumb out on to the porch roof and slid down a stanchion and traded his new coat for a jug of 40 rod, and clumb back again and had a good old time. And towards daylight he crawled out again, drunk as a fiddler, and rolled off the porch and broke his left arm in 2 pieces, and was most froze to death when somebody found him after sunup. And when they come to look at that spare room they had to take soundin's before they could navigate it. The judge he felt kinder sore. He said he reckoned a body could reform the old man with a shotgun, maybe, but he didn't know no other way. End of chapter.